Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Dana Haggard, Professor of Management and Curator of this video on time management. I'm sure you all have busy schedules, so let's get started. Here are 3 good definitions of time management. The Cambridge Dictionary defines time management as the practice of using the time that you have available in a useful and effective way, especially in your work. BusinessDictionary.com says it is a systematic, priority-based structuring of time allocation and distribution among competing demands. And the last one from Dictionary.com, the analysis of how working hours are spent and the prioritization of tasks in order to maximize personal efficiency in the workplace. All 3 of these do a good job of defining time management, although they all have some nuanced differences. You notice that in the Cambridge Dictionary that it uses the word effective. However, Dictionary.com uses the word efficiency. We're going to talk about both of these things. Being effective is doing the things that need to be done, whereas efficiency is about how quickly you can complete them. Notice also the BusinessDictionary.com definition is nice in that it acknowledges that there's competing demands on your time and on you. So why is time management important? Well, for one, with proper time management, we're able to be more productive. Time management also helps us to achieve our goals. And third, proper time management can help us reduce our stress levels. All 3 of these things contribute to higher performance in the workplace. How can time management be measured? Well, here are some links to different ways that you can measure your time management skills. Call your attention to the last one. So the first 3 are what we would call surveys or inventories, but the last one is a time management log. And this is where you actually sit down and write down how much time you spend during your day on the different tasks. And that way you can see how much time you're spending on the different activities. You can also, of course, if you don't want to write it down, there are plenty of apps out there that you can put on your phone that will help you track the time you've spent on individual tasks. According to Wetton and Cameron, there are 4 characteristics of effective time management. First, we have to learn to clearly distinguish what is important from what is urgent. Important means the activity is one that produces a desired result or is something that is highly valued by us. Urgent activities are those that demand immediate attention or must be taken care of in the short term. Just because something is urgent doesn't make it important, and vice versa. A helpful tool in discerning what category an activity falls in is the 2x2 matrix mapping urgency and importance. You can see it here on the left. Think about your to-do list and how you prioritize what you want to get accomplished in a day. If you are a list maker, make a list of the things you need to do and then try to determine which of the 4 quadrants each activity falls in. The idea of using the matrix is to help you prioritize and to be able to better budget your time so that you spend more of it on the important and less of it on the merely urgent. In my seated classes, I have often asked students to do this as an in-class activity. I ask them to make their lists, then compare the items on their lists to see if they have similar activities and also to see how different people can have the same lists but categorize the activities very differently. Remember that if you do not decide what is important, someone else will, and you'll likely never effectively manage your time. Next, our focus should be on achieving the goal rather than fixating on the methods that will be used to achieve it. This doesn't mean that we don't care how a goal is achieved and that anything is okay as long as it leads to success. What I mean is that we don't want to be so determined to do the things our way that we don't see the benefit in doing it another. And lastly, if we have used our personal values to determine what is important, we should be able to develop the ability to say no without feeling guilty. When someone asks us for help, most people's instinct is to say yes. However, we must balance our desire to help with our ability to help. I have learned over the years that it is better to say no up front than to find that you must back out of a commitment later. I have also learned that I do not have time to do everything I would like to do, so I have to prioritize. That prioritization helps me to only be mildly disappointed when I have to say no to something I'd like to do. It also means more than once I have been relieved that I said no up front. So now that we've covered effective time management, let's talk about improving efficiency. This list is ways that you can accomplish more by wasting less time in general. The next slide will cover things that are specific to the workplace. So first, make prioritized lists with deadlines. It's not just enough to make a list of the things you need to do. You need to reflect the priorities, the order in which those things need to be done. And you also need to attach deadlines. If something doesn't have a deadline, it's likely never going to get done. Have a place for everything and keep everything in its place. This may sound a little bit obsessive, but I can attest to the fact that it works really well for me. So I try to make sure that I know where everything is at, and that if I take something from its storage place, that I put it back there, and that way I always know where it's at and I don't waste time looking for it. Next, save your best time for important matters. So what do I mean by best time? So when do you do your best thinking? When do you feel that your brain is active and you can do your most and best work? So that's when you should do your important matters. Save those urgent things that aren't really important. Try to do those all, as many of them as you can, close together, and in a time where it's not going to be taxing on your brain. Next, keep a time log. So as I mentioned when we talked about measuring time management, keep a time log, either electronically or written on paper, where you write down how much time you spend on different projects during the day. Next, be sure to schedule personal time. A lot of times we have our calendars so full of the things that we need to do that we don't build any time for ourselves, and we don't also build in any buffer time. A lot of times what happens is we have a list of things that we need to do, but sometimes it takes us longer to do those things than we think, and so that pushes us even further behind in our time. So it's important to be aware of how long a task is going to take and be sure and schedule enough time for it, as well as scheduling in buffer time and time that's just for you, where you can sit down, relax, and try to get rid of stress. Next, allow yourself to worry only at a set time, and then, after that time has passed, focus on other things and try not to worry. Kind of, what does this mean? You might say, all right, today's Monday. My worry time for Monday is going to be from 7 a.m. to 7:15 a.m. And you worry about what you're going to do in those 15 minutes. And then, after that 15 minutes is over, you move on. And that way, you don't find yourself distracted by worry later in the day. If thoughts come to you about whatever the object of that worry is later in the day, you simply tell yourself, hey, I've worried as much as I'm going to about that today. Setting aside time to allow yourself to kind of wallow in the worry, but then saying, okay, I'm done with that, let's move on, will help you to get back time that you would have spent simply worrying about things instead of actually taking action. And this last one I'm sure you've heard about many times before, and that's to limit your time on social media. Social media is geared for us to spend as much time on it as we can. And we have a tendency to get lost in social media, and we don't realize how much time is passing. And then we are distressed when we realize the time has passed. We can't get it back, and we didn't get things accomplished that we wanted to. Now let's talk about some things that we can do that are specifically related to work tasks. Here are some ways to improve your time management by accomplishing more by wasting less time at work. Number 1, hold routine meetings at the end of the day. If it's not something that's going to require a lot of thought and creativity on the part of those attending, then those routine meetings are probably fine to be held at the end of the day when people are no longer perhaps at their best thinking time. You'll also find that routine meetings will be shorter if they're at the end of the day because people are ready to go home. Next, Only hold meetings when truly necessary. This is one of those things that when I was in industry drove me nuts, and actually still drives me a little crazy here in academia too. And that's when people would hold meetings when a meeting wasn't really necessary. They're just providing information they could have sent in an email. That's kind of frustrating, and it eats up time. If you're in charge of calling meetings, only call a meeting when it's really necessary. If you know you need to have a meeting, but it's going to be a short one, hold those short meetings standing up. Not having a chair to sit in and relax can motivate people to actually stay on task a little better than when they're having to stand up. Next, insist subordinates suggest solutions to problems. So if someone comes to you and tells you that there's an issue with whatever, ask them, okay, what do you suggest we do? And that way, you're getting them to be thinking and working on their problem solving. And also, if they've already thought it through, they may be saving you time by having come to you with a suggestion that will fix the problem. And then you don't have to go through the effort and time to find a solution. It's already there for you. Next, don't overschedule your day. This goes back a little bit to something from the previous slide. So be sure to plan in buffer time and realize that some things are going to take longer than you estimate. I particularly like this next one too. Meet visitors in the doorway and go to subordinates' workspaces for brief meetings. If you open the door and you stay in the doorway as you're talking to the person will get the message very subtly that you don't have time to spend a lot of time talking to them at that point. So this is something that I do when I'm at my office on campus. If someone comes by and I don't have a whole lot of time to talk to them, then I will stay in the doorway and conduct the conversation there. However, if I do have time and I want to talk to them, I'm always ready to open the door and say, hey, come in, take a seat, let's chat. But for when you're pushed for time, that's not always a good thing to do. And the reason you want to keep them in the doorway is once they sit down, it's going to be harder to motivate them to leave without directly asking them to. The same thing about going to subordinates' workspaces for brief meetings. If you just have a few questions you want answered, it's probably better to go by their workspace, stay standing up, and ask those questions. And that way, you're the one who has the ability to determine how long you spend there. So you can make sure and keep your meetings brief. Next, keep your workspace clean. This goes back a little bit to something from the previous slide as well, as far as having a place for everything and keeping everything in its place. I know that there are all sorts of teasing that I get for having a clean desk at work, but it helps me to focus if the only thing that's on my desk is the project I need to work on at that moment. And so I work to make sure there's nothing on my desk top except for the materials that I need for the task I am completing, and of course, a pen cup. But that's pretty much it. And I find that it helps me to focus and I get less distracted. The last thing on the list is delegate work. And delegating work means having someone else complete the task for you. We'll talk about delegation and empowerment in more detail in a later video. Delegating work is something that can be extremely useful not only to you, but to the people you're delegating to. However, if you're one of those folks who needs control over everything, it can be really hard to let go of that and have someone else complete a task for you. Okay, I've just finished a long list of things that you can do to improve your time management. And just looking at that list, it might stress you out. So look at the two lists and first congratulate yourself on any of the items you are already doing. Then pick at most one or two to work on in the near future. Once those things have been incorporated and they have become habits for you, then ask yourself if your time stress has decreased and if there is room for more improvement. If there is, come back to this list, pick another one or two items, and then work on those until they too become habits. And as always, there are plenty of resources on the internet that you can look at that have suggestions for more efficient or effective time management. I have a couple of links listed in the additional resources section of this video. And now, some questions for self-reflection. How often do you say yes when you would rather say no? When was the last time you opted to do something urgent versus something that was important? How hard is it for you to prioritize? Have you tried any of the tips for improving your time management efficiency that were listed here? Did it work? And if not, why do you think it didn't? How often have you wasted time doing something that was neither important nor urgent? What plan could you make to avoid doing that in the future? That concludes this video on time management. If you have any questions about topics covered in this video, please post them to the Student Questions discussion board on Blackboard. Chances are, if you have a question, another student has that question too. If you're intellectually curious and would like to learn more, please stay tuned for the Sources and Additional Resources section of this video. Thanks for watching.